May I bid you a very warm welcome to this presentation, one of two I'm delighted to present during this exciting 3-day online Veterinary World Class Summit in South Africa. My name is John Sheridan. I graduated at the Royal Veterinary College in London way back in 1960, and I've enjoyed a career-long interest in the business of veterinary practice as clinician, as practice owner, as franchisor, management consultant, corporate investor, owner of the Veterinary Business Membership website and presenter of the Veterinary Business Video Show, and my regular weekly video blog. Far too many veterinary practices in your country and mine are generating inadequate levels of profit. The question is, why hasn't the situation improved decades after our profession recognised that better business results in better medicine? There's no shortage of advice, of CPD opportunities and business consultancy and advisory services, and it may be that practice owners haven't yet learned the lesson we discovered as clinicians, that effective treatment requires an accurate diagnosis. And that applies as much to management problems affecting your business as it does to clinical problems affecting your patients. During this session, we'll consider how practice owners can use just 5 numbers, 5 key performance indicators derived from a free online benchmark service to find out why their own practice may not be generating the profit they deserve, how to utilize their existing resources more effectively, and to identify the top 2 or 3 operational policies which will help achieve the success they seek. The problem is that far too many veterinary practices are generating inadequate levels of profit in your country and mine. But that's certainly one of the conclusions from a current survey of data submitted by UK practices to the free worldwide benchmark service, which is available for all practice owners and managers in the English-speaking world. I've got data from much fewer practices in South Africa, about 30, but the results are similarly very disappointing. The amount of data that I have for practices in the UK currently at the moment is about 170 practices at the moment, but it's a fairly small proportion of the total number of practices, but I think that the findings are significant. The big question is, why hasn't the situation improved decades after our profession recognised that better business results in better medicine? So if you own or manage a veterinary practice in South Africa, I wonder if I could ask you these 3 questions. Question 1 is, does it deliver a healthy profit for reinvestment in your people, your facilities and your services? Question 2 is, does it deliver a healthy return on your investment? And question 3 is the value of your investment in the practice growing in line with your expectations? Now, they're simple questions, but they may not be so easy to answer because, firstly, we need to define what we mean by profit. The big difference, of course, between cash and profit is that if I ask you how much cash you have in your wallet and you tell me you've got $100 or 1,000 Rand or £50, then you know and I know that that sum is likely to be exactly right. If I ask you how much profit is your business generating, then the first thing we have to do is to define exactly what we mean by profit. There are all sorts of definitions for profit, and the definition most appropriate at any one time is what is the purpose of defining this particular measure of profit. You might imagine that the profit identified at the bottom of your practice accounts, if you're a sole trader or if you're trading as a partnership, that might be an appropriate measure of profit. But of course, it wouldn't be appropriate because from our point of view, what we're considering is how much of our income is left after paying for all the costs of delivering professional services. And if your practice is trading as a sole trader or a partnership, for example, then those accounts are produced not for management purposes, but they're produced solely to help you, to assist your accountant and you negotiating with the tax authorities in your country to define how much tax you're going to be liable for. So, for example, the profit figure at the bottom of the sole trader or partnership accounts ought really to be defined as profit before owner's remuneration. And sometimes it would be profit before an appropriate cost of the facilities in which the practice operates. Sometimes practice premises are owned by the owner of the business, and the accounts don't include an appropriate rental for the premises. So we have to be very careful about defining exactly what we mean by profit. And what we're interested in is to know exactly what is the level of profit after owner's remuneration in their clinical and or managerial role. And we also need to know how that profit for your practice compares with other similar practices in South Africa. So may I invite you to use the worldwide online benchmark service. It's quick and easy. The data that is required is data which you can identify pretty readily from your practice accounts and from your own knowledge. And it's a free online service. This is a screenshot of the data entry form for the benchmark service. So what we're looking at here is the practice name. That's easy. Your name, legal format. There's a drop-down menu here, whether you're trading as a sole trader or a partnership or a corporate body or a limited liability partnership. Practice description, small animal, large animal, equine, or whatever it may be. Number of owners, full-time equivalents, the practice revenue, and the numbers we're looking for are really the numbers derived from your last available audited practice accounts. Practice revenue net of sales tax or value-added tax, the cost of the employee vets in your practice, what was the level of profit defined from your annual accounts, what country are you located in, what is your email address so that we can contact you to let you have a note of your report or ask you any questions. What currency do you use? What is the capital value of the property? We would only use that if, for example, your accounts do not include an appropriate rental for the premises and you or practice owner owns the property, then we would calculate a notional rent to be included in the benchmark report. The number of employee vets in the practice full-time equivalent, the cost of drugs and supplies from your accounts, the cost of support staff from your accounts, that's all the nurses, reception team, clerical staff, management staff, and so on, and your best estimate of the average transaction value in your practice, or the average charge per transaction, the Americans describe it. And the benchmark link includes a lot of notes to make it easy for you to submit your own data. Most data, of course, is derived directly from your annual financial accounts and your own knowledge of the practice. And here is the link. If you access that link, then it's quick, it's easy, you can submit your data, and within 2 or 3 days you will have a personalized report. Now, your unique practice report will include these 5 key numbers. What we're interested in from the point of view of planning a way ahead for your practice is transaction volume index, The cost of goods sold is a percentage of practice income. That figure is usually readily defined directly from your practice accounts. The cost of practice team members, including the practice owner in their clinical or managerial role, as a percentage of practice income. It will include the cost of the establishment, that's the practice premises and overheads, as a percentage of practice income. And it will calculate a net profit after owner's remuneration as a percentage of practice income. And all of those numbers in your personalized report will be compared with the generic quartile results, that's the upper quartile, median and lower quartile results for all the other participating practices in South Africa. And it's these 5 numbers and the generic quartile numbers for all the other participating practices in South Africa which are going to be the key performance indicators which you can then use to find out what's going right and what's going wrong in your veterinary business, and then to identify the operational and other management policies required to achieve the business success that you and your practice team deserve. Here's how. First, let's talk about the net profit after owner's remuneration as a percentage of your practice income. That's the figure we're after. What we need to know is what should it be, what is it now, and does it reflect a realistic return on investment? Does it does it enable the practice to reinvest in equipment, in facilities, in premises, in people, in training, in order to be able to continue to deliver the highest standards of professional care to your clients? The worldwide benchmark report includes the net profit after owner's remuneration generated by your practice, the lower, median, upper quartile generic net profit generated by all the other practices, and if the estimated profit is greater than 18%, we score it as excellent. The report includes notional scores which are based on the notional scores which were originally established by the NCVEI, that's the National Commission on Veterinary Economic Indicators, which was used in the United States some years ago, and which we continue to use. It's a fairly simple but sound basis on which to score profits. So if the estimated profit for your practice is greater than 18%, we'd score it as excellent. If it's between 15 and 18%, we'd score it as good. If it's between 12 and 15%, we'd score it as average. That's average as a descriptive term, not as a mathematical term. If the profit level is between 8 and 12%, we'd regard that as below average, and profits below 8% we'd regard as poor. So now we can start to work out exactly why your practice success in professional terms may not be matched by its success as a business. In a nutshell, you may be disappointed at the level of profit, of real profit, that your practice is generating. So let's look at each of those 5 numbers in turn and consider their significance. First, let's have a look at the transaction volume index. TVI is simply a measure of demand, of busyness in the practice. How is it calculated? It's calculated on the basis of practice turnover in a year divided by the average transaction value, divided by the number of full-time equivalent vets generating that income, divided by 365. So it's a hypothetical number. It is an index. It's not a real number. We can't say that in this practice a TVI of 12 means that on average the vets are dealing with 12 transactions a day. it isn't as simple as that. So it's best to regard it simply as an index. And in my experience, it tends to range between 6 and 7 at the bottom end to maybe 18, 19, 20, or maybe more at the top end. So a practice which is with a level of TVI level of 6 or 7 tends to be a very low volume, high value practice. A very busy practice might have a TVI of 20 or more. Is a very busy practice. The vets are dealing with a lot of transactions. The question, of course, is there a direct comparison between TVI and profit? Can we say that busy practices with a high TVI, are generally more profitable than practices with a low TVI? And the answer to that is no, there is no direct comparison. There are some very, very busy practices that are very profitable, but there are some very busy practices too which are losing money. And at the other end of the spectrum, I've come across practices with a low TVI, 6 or 7 at the bottom end, generating very healthy levels of profit. But simply you can have practices with low TVIs which are unprofitable. So the issue really is to consider what business strategy is. Is your practice trying to be all things to all men, or are you picking a particular niche in your practice marketplace? Let's consider this sort of simple graph. If we have price on the one side and volume on the other, and draw a graph, you might so that on the left hand side you'll say that at this level we're providing a high price service to a low number of clients. This end of the spectrum, we're providing a large number of clients with a relatively low price service. So the question, of course, is for any practice, where do you pitch yourself in this spectrum? Traditionally, if you ask vets where you're going to be in this graph, they would say here, right in the middle. We like to provide a reasonable standard of veterinary professional services to an average number of people at a medium sort of price. But nowadays, clients don't want to be average. Clients want to be special. They want to be special this end of the spectrum, or maybe they want to be special this end of the spectrum. So it's more important for practices to choose. Are we going to be a relatively low volume, high price practice, or are we going to be aiming to be a high volume, low price practice? There's no right or wrong, and this is just one of the issues that practice leaders and owners and managers have to think about, where they pitch their practice in a busy marketplace. And the more competition there is, the more important it will be to select a particular niche within that market, which will make your practice exceptional. It might be related to volume and price, but it might be related to a whole lot of other measures, like being species specific or condition specific or client specific. So if we continue to look at TVI, if the TVI for your practice is at or above the upper quartile, then your practice is busy, and it suggests that client numbers aren't the problem. You may have a profitable practice. You may be a practice with generating very disappointing levels of profit, and if that's the case, then the TVI being high would suggest that shortage of clients is not a problem for you. So if TVI is below the upper quartile and profit is inadequate, then we need to investigate to find out why it is that TVI may be low in your practice. So what are the possible reasons for a low TVI in a practice linked with poor levels of profit? Maybe you simply need more clients. Question is, how many clients do you have? So the task for management, the first task will be to review your client and patient database numbers on a per vet full-time equivalent basis. Do you know, for example, what your client database, how many active clients you have in your practice on a per vet full-time equivalent basis? That means you've got to define what an active client is. And in the UK, for example, traditionally we had levels of 900 or 1,000 active clients per vet full-time equivalent, but that tends to be dropping now. Many practices will have an active client database in the order of 750 or 800 or 900, those sorts of numbers in a typical small animal practice. So if the profitability of your practice is not as good as it ought to be and the TVI is low, then one of the tasks you have to do is to find out what those database numbers are for your practice. And my best advice is that you calculate that figure on a monthly basis. You monitor the trends. You identify the number of new clients every month, and if for example you start off with 1,000 clients per vet, active clients per vet at the beginning of the month, and at the beginning of and during that month you register 100 new clients, and at the beginning of the following month you have 1,050 active clients, you know that you have gained 100 and lost 50. So overall you've gained 50. And so the ones you've lost we regard as lapsed. They're not lost. If you were to phone them and said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Jones, that you're no longer a client of ours," she will say, "Of course I'm a client of yours. It's just that I haven't found it necessary to seek your advice in the last 12 months. So the first task then is to identify the number of active clients on a per vet full-time equivalent basis, the number of new clients every month, the number of lapsed clients every month. And then you need to work out how many new clients are required to maintain the status quo. Many consultants would tell you, for example, that any practice is going to lose 15 or 20% of its client database every year, simply because people die or move away or the animals die and aren't replaced and so on. So you need to know what that number is for your practice. And if you and I owned a practice and the current number was 1,000 active clients per vet, we would do the sums and we come to the conclusion that in this practice we'd have to replace 20% of that, that's 200 clients every year, that's 4 clients every week. So in our practice, for every vet, we need to register 4 new clients every week just to stay where we are. And if we want to grow, we have to grow those numbers. So it seems to me that the prime role for every member of the practice team is to win and retain X new clients every month. And your task as an owner or manager is to define what is X for your practice. Why else could the TVI be low? You might have a good number of clients, high level of active clients, but then you're losing them every month. So you need to measure and monitor client retention. One of the important reception roles in practice is to convert inquiries into appointments. And in order to do that, we have to start thinking, why is it that clients arrange an appointment in your practice? And in my view, there are only 4 reasons. One is that somebody you've never seen before phones because the cat's been run over or the dog's been sick. Some emergency has happened, so they phone to fix an appointment. They may phone to fix an appointment because they're an existing client and there's been an emergency. It may be because they phone to make an appointment because the practice has taken some marketing initiative, sent them a text or an email, or a reminder that Charlie needs to come in for a health check or his annual vaccination or whatever it may be. And then the fourth reason is that some individual within the practice has recommended to the pet owner that we need to see Charlie next week in order to investigate this problem, or in order to do something about those teeth. There are only those four reasons. And if in your practice you go through 100 consecutive consultations and you keep a record of exactly why it was that pet owner phoned to fix an appointment, you will discover that 60 or possibly 70% or even more of the appointments which are made in your practice are made as a result of some initiative by a team member in the practice or by the practice as a whole. That is, far more appointments are made because of some initiative taken by the practice or an individual within the practice than are arranged because of some untoward episode out of the blue. So when we ask, for example, why was last Wednesday quiet in your practice, the answer is last Wednesday was quiet because you simply didn't plan to make last Wednesday busy. So we need to measure consulting room occupancy, and we need to measure compliance measures in the consulting room. This is a management problem. There's a tool that you can use to record exactly what happened in the last 50 consecutive consultations, in which we're looking at the charge for the consulting bit of the consultation, not the charge for the additional injections or dispensed items, but simply for the initial consultation. That gives us a measure of what the average consulting charge is compared with the standard consulting charge. We also need to record, did the veterinarian make some specific recommendation about a procedure, a diagnostic procedure or surgical procedure, or some other investigative procedure, and how many of those that were recommended actually were carried out in the following 3 or 4 weeks. And similarly, did the vet on this particular occasion recommend that the animal be re-examined in the following week or 2 weeks? And in the event, was that animal re-examined? This is a very simple, easy, and accurate way of measuring and monitoring compliance in the consulting room. And usually the problem is, it's not a question of compliance by the client. It's usually a measure of compliance by the members of your practice team. If compliance is poor, something is going wrong between when the vet makes a recommendation and the client may agree in the consulting room, and then it doesn't happen. That's a business, that's an administrative, that's a management problem, which you as a practice manager need to be able to cope with. All of these things need a detailed review, and you will need to use an appropriate business tool. And all of them suggest missed opportunities to grow TVI. So if TVI is not good in your practice, there are all sorts of ways in which you can find out why that is. So now let's look at the first of your 3 cost headings: cost of goods sold in your practice. If the cost of goods sold as a percentage of turnover is at or below the median of all the other practices participating in the benchmark service, then it's probably not a key reason for any disappointing level of profit generated by your practice. If the cost of goods sold is higher than the median, then you certainly need to investigate further why this is happening. And first we need to find out whether this is primarily a cost problem or a revenue problem. Simply put, are you buying too much? Are you paying too much? Or are you wasting too much? Or are you buying exactly the right amount and paying the right appropriate amount, and you're not wasting any, but you're simply generating insufficient revenue by selling or using all those drugs and supplies? So it's imperative to find out whether this is primarily a cost problem for you or a revenue problem. It's important that you really try to understand what's going on in your practice to answer those questions. You can use a number of business tools or techniques. Perhaps the first important thing to do is to review working capital ratios. And one of the most important is your stock or inventory turnover level. How much stock are you holding in terms of trading days? In many practices in the UK, would be aiming to hold 1 month's supply of stock on hand, on the basis that they're running an emergency service, and there are some drugs and supplies which actually have to be on the shelf today in order to deal with an emergency problem. That may be true for some stock items, but for many others, it seems to be ridiculous to hold 2 or 3 or 4 weeks supply of stock on hand, when in most parts of the country, in the UK, and I don't know how it is in South Africa, you can order stuff today, and in most cases, in most areas, you would have it delivered by tomorrow. So important to review working capital ratios and decide, for example, whether you're holding too much stock. Another simple test is to do what is described as the red dot test, taught to me by Mark Opperman many years ago. What the idea is that you pop into the practice when it's quiet one Sunday, and you stick a little red sticker on every stock item in your pharmacy or your dispensary. And then a week later or a fortnight later, you go around and see how many of those red dots are still available. That'll give you a clue as to whether you're holding too much stock in hand at any one time. My advice is that you do a regular stock take every month. I don't mean every stock item every month, but I do mean perhaps doing a stock take of vaccines in January, of parasiticides in February, in injectables in March, and so on. I'd also review your inventory stock control protocol, how drugs are ordered, who is responsible for ordering, who is responsible for checking them back in, who is responsible for breakages and pilferages and spoilage control. I also think it would make sense to separate the cost of dispensed items, retail, sales and consumables. Much depends on how your accountant deals with the cost of goods sold in your practice accounts. And it does seem crazy sometimes to lump together items which are pharmaceutical items which you dispense and sell to clients, retail products which you like pet foods and toys and collars and leads and other retail sales, and drugs and supplies and consumables which you use when delivering professional services as one cost item. So I'd be inclined to separate out those 3 items: dispensed items, retail sales and consumables, and I'd be inclined to regard the cost of consumables, drugs and supplies used in delivering surgical and other diagnostic services as a specific overhead for surgical and other procedures. Then it's important to identify what proportion of revenue is generated by product sales and the separate contribution made by selling products on the one hand and selling professional services on the other. The second of the 3 cost headings is the cost of you in your clinical and management role and every other member of the practice team. So if the cost of people is at or below the median compared with the other participating practices, then probably that's not a key reason for any disappointing level of profits in your practice. If, on the other hand, the cost of people is higher than the median, then you need to investigate the matter further. And again, first job is to find out whether this is primarily a cost problem or a revenue problem. The simple question is, are you employing too many? Are you paying them too much? Or are you utilizing your team inefficiently? Or are the numbers exactly right in your practice? You're paying them the right level of salary and remuneration, but the revenue that they're generating is too low. And it's important to identify which, if one of those factors is responsible, which one is responsible. So again, it's important that you really understand what your team members are achieving to answer those questions. You could use a number of business tools or techniques. Question one is, does every member of your staff have a clear job description? Does everyone know exactly what their role is? Does every member of your team understand how you will be measuring and monitoring the extent to which they are fulfilling their responsibilities? Do your team members buy in to the practice vision and business objectives? If not, then that's a leadership problem. It's important with a small team of people that everybody understands exactly what my role is and how my role fits in with the role of all the other members of the team, in order that together we can achieve our professional and business objectives for this practice of ours. So do they know what they're expected to achieve and how their performance will be measured? A technique you can use is to review 50 consultations from 4 or 5 weeks ago in the practice to monitor the level of fee and service compliance. By that I mean it's necessary to keep a record of, did the vet on that particular occasion recommend a specific diagnostic or surgical or other procedure, and during the following 4 weeks was that procedure carried out, or did the vet on that occasion recommend a re-examination for that animal, and during the subsequent 4 weeks was that re-examination carried out. And the other task is to compare the average consulting charge with the standard charge. So we're reviewing re-examination and recommended procedure compliance, reviewing professional fees, and using an appropriate business tool in order to do that. And another really significant factor here is to understand the crippling costs of discounts. All too often in practices, an individual member of staff, or sometimes the practice owner, will happily agree discounts of 5 or 10 or 15 or 20%. And if the overall profitability of the practice after owner's remuneration is maybe only 10%, then it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense by giving away most of that profit for a significant number of clients. And then the third of the cost headings is the cost of the practice premises and business overheads. So we follow the same diagnostic format that we used for COGS and the cost of people. How do your practice costs compare with the generic costs of the other participating practices? Is this a cost problem or a revenue problem? I'd be inclined to look at trends over the previous 3 years. I review the top 5 overhead costs. I try to identify any one-off or exceptional costs. I need to identify any opportunities to reduce costs. And I'd also try and understand the significance of delivering a professional services in a fixed cost business and the value of a marginal increase in income. So how can you improve the performance of the practice which you own or manage in South Africa? In my view, you can do that not by working harder or working longer, not by expecting your team to work harder or longer, not by drastically cutting your costs or inflating your fees, not with special offers or discounts to compete with the practice up the road, but by following the lessons you've learned as a clinician. That is, an accurate diagnosis is key. Find out what's really going on in your practice, what's getting in the way of the profitability that you deserve. At that stage, you can assemble your thoughts for the strategic medium-term development of the business. I would regard that as a sort of a 3 to 5 year medium-term plan. And then I get down on paper. I try to identify clear personal, professional, and business objectives. I identify specific financial objectives and create a budget for year one of your 3 to 5 year plan. If you get the numbers right for year one and you can achieve what you hope to achieve in year one, you're well on the way to delivering your medium-term 3 to 5 year plan. And that's the time to plan and implement the specific operational and other policies to ensure that the budget is delivered. So if you could do with some help, the Veterinary Practice Profit Planner is a comprehensive online tool which takes you step by step through a systematic diagnostic process to find out why your practice may not be generating the profit you deserve, and to identify those top 2 or 3 operational policies which will enable you and your team to achieve the success you seek. It's freely available for subscribing members of the veterinarybusiness.org community, and if you'd like to join us, we'd be delighted to welcome you. Here's the link. So whatever your role or interest in the business of veterinary practice, I wish you every possible success. Be sure to let me know if I can be of any help at any time. Just click the Ask John tab on my website. Here's the link. I look forward very much to hearing from you.